last night, and I was working on the email to be sent out. And I have to apologize, I don't have a handout for you today, so you're going to have to listen to me.
Okay, can I hit record? Can
Yeah,
everybody
please.
hear? I don't know.
Yeah, they're nodding. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can hear you hopefully, right? If you say something? No, we can't hear you.
They're probably on mute.
No, it's the
Is there
speaker
volume
on.
right up
Let me, I don't see a little green light where the speaker is. Let's see, here's the speaker.
It's not plugged in.
It's not plugged in. So let me plug in the
It
speaker.
took me a long time to figure that out at home.
I might never figure it out.
Okay, and, oh boy.
It's the qualifications of
Ah.
nowadays.
That's the microphone.
Zoom
And,
master.
Right.
okay, there's left and right speaker. This is not compatible to that. Okay, is it gonna plug in the front? Let's see.
Has to be a
Ah.
all trays to you.
There
Can
you
you
go.
guys talk now? Nope, we can't hear you. So that's no good. So I feel very bad about that,
Barbara's gonna come.
but we cannot hear you. Okay. But Barbara will figure it out. Okay.
Sorry. Oh, sorry.
So we're going to talk about biblical views of monarchy. Okay? So, give me a moment to find myself of why I'm here. Okay. So, throughout human history, the most common form of rulership up until like the last couple hundred years has been rule by one person, the king, monarchies. And they're stable because you have one person in charge, and then there's one person in charge, and it's easy, right? It's efficient. You know who the boss is. And if you don't like it, you raise up an army and you overthrow them, or more conveniently, you just find someone who is intimate with the king and kill him privately and then take over. But that's how regime change happens, right? That's how rulership happens, okay? But in the earliest Israelite political texts, it's not the king who's in charge, it's God, which is great, because you don't have to worry about succession, right? Nobody's overthrowing God, right? It's a nice, great system. The problem with that system is that God doesn't communicate very well. And it makes for a terrible administration, okay? So what we're going to start off with is the judges, and this notion of the judge representing God, and then after they try that out for a while, then they're going to say, okay, that doesn't work so well, and so we'll go back to standard monarchies with kings representing God. Now, the problem with the king representing God is everywhere else, the king has no limits, right? Because the king is the fount of justice. For example, if you go back to my heritage, the reason why I have to pay my parking ticket in Winnipeg, Manitoba, is because God gave the right of granting justice to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of blessed memory. Now it's King Charles, right? So the king is the fount of judgment. The king is the fount of justice, and the king cannot be unjust because the king decides what is just. But we want to put some limits onto that because God is in charge, okay? So let's try to look at this through some sort of organized way. And again, I apologize, I'm a little bit discombobulated this one. But what we're going to talk about is God is king, then we're going to look at Jewish kings, we'll look a little bit into perhaps non-Jewish kings, we'll be looking at the biblical view of monarchy, the constitution of monarchy, and some critiques of monarchy. Okay? Questions so far? Okay, good. Okay. So the first hint we have of monarchy is with Gideon. So we've been in the wilderness and we've traveled through and we've come into the promised land, and the Israelites are there. And Joshua has settled and Joshua has conquered, and we're into the book of Judges. Now, Gideon has an interesting story. So the Israelites have done what is offensive to the Lord. Now, whenever the Israelites do something that's offensive to the Lord, what is the Lord's or God's usual response to offensiveness amongst the Israelites? Punishment. By whom?
One of their enemies.
By one of their enemies, right? See, God, you see, and as an aside, we talked about this at the discussion of the Golden film. Every other nation has the good sense and the politeness that when they're defeated, they say our gods have been defeated and the new gods are more powerful. But not us. We're stubborn. Whenever we're defeated, we say our God has subcontracted to their gods to punish us through those people who are conquering us. Therefore, our God is still in charge. It makes us just difficult to rule over. Okay. So the Midianites are harassing the Israelites for about 7 years. And the Amalekites and the Kedemites are coming up and raiding them. And Israel is reduced to utter misery by the Midianites. And they cry out to the Lord. Oh, it's important you have to cry out to God, right? Exodus from Egypt would have been so much quicker if we had not waited 400 years to cry. And, yeah, because I heard their cry. And an angel of the Lord comes and sat under the terebinth at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, and his son Gideon was beating out the wheat at a winepress in order to keep it safe from the Midianites. Okay, this is Gideon. And the angel of the Lord appears to him and says, "The Lord is with you, valiant warrior." And of course, Gideon's going to say, in true Moses fashion, "I'm the youngest of 7 kids. I'm nothing. What? Just fine." The Lord says, "I will be with you. You shall defeat Midian to a man." And they have this great plan, and involves a lot of banging on potsherds and things, and the other army runs away, and it's great. So the Spirit of the Lord enveloped Gideon. He sounded the horn, and the Abiezrites rallied behind him. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, here's the important part, "Rule over us, you, your son, your grandson as well, for you have saved us from the Midianites." But Gideon replied, "I will not rule over you myself, nor shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you." Okay? And that is the pattern of the book of Judges. So there's an interesting comment by Martin Buber. Okay? Martin Buber is talking about theocracy. He says, okay, theocracy is a post-biblical concept. Theocracy ruled by God. However, it does help us understand the Bible, Buber says. So Buber acknowledges that the kingship of God requires human agents, but he views those agents as positive things. And here's what he has to say. We have a people, and the people is in bondage. A man, Moses, receives the charge to lead it out. That is he whom I have described as the leader in the original meaning of the word. It is he who serves in a human way as a tool for the act which God pronounces. I bore you on eagle's wings. Right? He's the eagle, right? And brought you unto myself. I've already spoken of his life, but in the middle of his life, the event takes place in which Moses, after the passage through the Red Sea, intones the song in which the people joins, which is the proclamation of the king. The words in which the song ends proclaim it, "King shall the Lord be forever and ever." Adonai yimlach le'olam va'ed. Okay? The people here has chosen God himself for its king, and that means that it has made a vital and experienced truth out of the tradition of the divine kingdom, which was common to all Semitic peoples, but which had never been taken quite seriously. Right? All the Semites, apparently, viewed God as their king, their God as their king, but we're taking it literally. Right? Usually they had, the king dress up as the god. So the Hebrew leaders are so much in earnest about it that after the land has been conquered, they undertake to do what is contrary to history. They try to build up a society without a ruling power and save only that of God, right? Which is a great fantasy. It's a great experiment in primitive theocracy, of which the Bible, Book of Judges, tells us, and it degenerates into anarchy, as is shown in the examples given in the last part of the Book of Judges, right? So over the course of the Book of Judges, here's the pattern. There's going to be a crisis. A leader is going to be raised up by God. The people will be rescued. And then everything's going to go well for as long as that leader is living. Then that leader's going to die. And then after they die, things are going to go poorly. And then there's going to be a crisis. And then God's going to appoint another leader. And that is the entire Book of Judges, right? Okay. So this is the rhythm of the Book of Judges. It might almost be called a tragic rhythm, were it not that the word tragic is foreign to the spirit of biblical language, still Buber's words. But in this Book of Judges, there's also something being prepared. As the experience of failure, of the inability to bring about this intended naive primitive theocracy becomes ever deeper, ever stronger grows the demand for a human kingdom. So they began to want a king. The people are going to demand a king, right? So here's the story. It's the book of Samuel. It's chapter 8. Okay? When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn son was Joel. The second son's name was Abijah. They sat as judges in Beersheba. But his sons did not follow in his ways. They're bent on gain. They accepted bribes, and they subverted justice. So Samuel's the first one who is trying to make a dynasty, right? Samuel, remember, he has this incredible birth, right? His mother is Hannah. We read about her on Rosh Hashanah, and he is raised up as a Nazarite from birth. He's raised in the temple. He is, like, from the beginning, raised to be like a king, right? In the same way that kings, from the day of their birth, they're trained to become a leader. Right?
What's the name of Nazareth?
So she says God says in the Haftarah, don't drink any wine and don't do this. And when he's born, never give him wine and never cut his hair.
That's Shishak.
Him too. Yeah. Samuel was a pretty hirsute guy. Okay, I'm pretty sure. We'll look it up afterwards. In any event, he's raised from birth. But his kids, also raised from birth with the expectation that they'll take over, they're not turning out well, okay? So the people see what's coming, and they don't like it. All the elders of Israel assembled and came to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, "You have grown old, and your sons have not followed your ways. Therefore appoint a king for us, to govern us like all the other nations." Just let us be normal, okay? We're looking back on history. We've seen this cycle of boom and bust and fat, okay? We'd like to have some stability. Samuel prayed to the Lord. Oh, Samuel was displeased that they said, "Give us a king to govern us," because, God is king. Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord replied to Samuel, "Heed the demand of the people in everything they say to you. For it is not you that they have rejected. It is me they have rejected as their king." they have rejected me. Like everything else they've done ever since I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and worshiping other gods, so they are doing to you. Everett Fox has observed that if there's one common theme to the Torah, it's whining or whinging. Whining. The people whine about Moses. The people whine about God. Moses whines about the people. Moses whines about God. God whines about the people, and God whines about. They're all whining to each other. Nobody's ever happy, right? And I hate to say this, but God's a real whiner. God complains all the time. It's like God is the victim here. You're God. How can you be the victim? But God's the victim. I could go in different directions here, but I'm not going to. It's me they've rejected as their king. Like everything else they've done ever since I brought them out from the land of Egypt to this day. Forsaking me, worshiping other gods, so they are doing to you. Heed their demand, but warn them solemnly, and tell them about the practices of any king who will rule over them. Okay.
Okay, but let's go back.
Yep.
Because the Torah presages the point for the king.
Absolutely. The Torah says, if you want to have a king, then these are the rules.
Yes.
But there's an if.
Well, if you want to have a king, that means you can.
I know, we're allowed to have one, but there are rules.
Yes.
Yes. And
And of course, the question is whether some of them post-date Shlomo, but that's a different
absolutely. I mean, look, I, as a parent, I can say to my kid, if you want to do this, here are the restrictions. But I don't think you should do it, right? I read an article recently in the Back of the Week. The Week is a wonderful magazine, and they don't write any of their own stuff. They just recycle from other people, but they try to balance it together. So you're seeing conservative and liberal opinions on one page, and at the back they always have an essay from someplace that they think is interesting. And this particular one was about a woman who runs a service, and her service is, if you are going to get high by yourself, call me, so that if you overdose, I can call the ambulance for you. Okay? Don't do it alone, right? And so yeah, she says, if you want to, shoot up, then call me and I'll listen to you. But the main message is don't do it at all. Okay, so if you want a king, that's fine. But it's not like I'm encouraging you or anything.
So is the alternative to having a king just getting all your direction directly from
Sure.
God?
Yeah.
Who doesn't communicate very well?
Who gave us the Torah? That's all you need. Okay, look.
He communicates. God communicates through the judges.
Yeah, it's a theoretical structure. Okay, let's just roll with it. So Samuel reports all the words of the Lord to the people who are asking him for king. He said, "This will be the practice of the king who will rule over you." And this is true. "He will take your sons and appoint them as his charioteers and horsemen." Yeah, there's going to be a draft. "And they will serve as outrunners for his chariots." Yeah. "He will appoint them as his chiefs of thousands and fifties, or they will have to plow his fields, reap his harvest, and make his weapons and the equipment for his chariots." If you have a king, you're going to have to give him tribute. "He will take your daughters as perfumers, cooks, and bakers." Perfumers. It's a big, important thing.
Wouldn't bathe often, so.
That's true, yeah.
And soap wasn't as effective, yes. He will seize your choice fields, vineyards, and olive groves and give them to his courtiers. He will take a tenth of your grain and vintage and give it to his eunuchs and courtiers. He will take your male and female slaves. As an aside, it's problematic that people have slaves, and we give the Bible a pass, but it is deeply problematic. It's a surgical procedure.
From his court.
I think the eunuchs are drawn from the slaves. I don't think there's castrality in this culture.
To look over as many lives.
Right,
Make sure
yeah.
they're not.
That's what eunuchs are for.
For his soul.
He will take your male and female slaves, your choice young men, and your asses, put them to work for him. He will take a tenth of your flocks, and you shall become his slaves. When the day will come when you cry out because of the king whom you yourself have chosen, and the Lord will not answer you on that day. Okay? You want to do it? Fine. It's like when my sister went out. But the people would not listen to Samuel's warning. No, they said, we must have a king over us, that we may be like them in the other nations. Let a king rule over us and go us ahead, fight our battles. Samuel heard all the people said, report to the Lord. The Lord said to Samuel, heed their demands, appoint a king for them. Samuel said to the men of Israel, all of you, go home. Okay. So, okay. That's the setup for kingship. If you want a sense of the relationship between the sort of the vision of kingship, according to the kings of Israel, Psalm 89, verses 21 through 38, kind of express the relationship between the king and God. I found David my servant, anointed him with my sacred oil. My hand shall be constantly with him, and my arm shall strengthen him. The kings see themselves as God's agent. No enemy shall oppress him, no vile man afflict him. I will crush his adversaries before him. I will strike down those who hate him. My faithfulness and steadfast love shall be with him. His horn shall be exalted through my name. I will set his hand upon the sea, his right hand upon the rivers. He shall say to me, you are my Father, my God, the rock of my deliverance. Right? The kings are going to see themselves as God's agent, God's representative. That sounds good. I will appoint him firstborn, highest of the kings of the earth. I will maintain my steadfast love with him for always. My covenant with him shall endure. I will establish his line forever, his throne as long as the heaven lasts. If his sons forsake my teaching, the Torah, and do not observe my commands, I will punish their transgression with the rod, their iniquities with plagues. But I will not take away my steadfast love from him. I will not betray my faithfulness. I will not violate my covenant or change what I have uttered. I have sworn by my holiness once and for all. I will not be false to David. His line shall continue forever. His throne as the sun before me, as the moon established forever, as enduring witnesses in the sky. What do you think of that psalm?
So is that God pledging loyalty to the king and to
Yes. Well, yeah, of course.
What number was
That was 89. So, interesting thing about that song That psalm is the basis for my personal theology. When I talk about God's relationship to human beings, right, I'm using this model. Okay. A tiny little board with one color and no eraser. Okay? God gives humanity, or the king, rules, instructions, etc. And the human beings, or the king, is supposed to follow these rules, right? So these are expectations. And this is compliance. Right? That's a relationship. Mitzvah, following the mitzvahs. If we follow the expectations and compliance, God is happy. If we do not follow with compliance, God is unhappy. However, God will always have loyalty. And on the individual third person, will always have love, right? This is a model of parenthood, right? Parent, child, expectations, follow through. Yes, I'm proud of you. No, I'm ashamed of you, but I will always love you. Okay? And then I like to contrast it with Christianity and how it doesn't follow through on that. Questions, thoughts on that?
Rabbi?
That's an aside. My critique of Christianity is that the expectation here is that you will have belief. And here, if there's no belief, there's no love, because you're going to hell.
And don't they excommunicate if you don't?
Well, yeah,
Well, we don't, we say.
Well, we excommunicate, but you are out of the communication with.
Spinoza was this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Was excommunicated.
We talk about harem, but remember,
You couldn't find another place?
Down the block.
He did. He was still down the block. Or
Rabbi?
wait a second, as happens, if one congregation, if 11 Jews and one doesn't agree, he starts his own synagogue.
Right.
I mean, Sheldon had.
yeah, Sheldon, please. I can't hear you.
If, let me,
Maybe he's looking to try to.
can you hear me now?
Yeah, get Barbara, because,
She wanted to finish.
There is,
okay.
if there's no king,
So Sheldon,
He can't hear you.
you can't hear me?
hang on.
I'm
No,
not
they can't-
muted.
They just went to get Barbara, see if she can fix the speaker. I know it's really frustrating, sorry.
Speaker language. Speaker phones.
But the three of us on Zoom can speak amongst ourselves. So if you were
I don't know sign language. I barely know spoken language.
Sign language, that's Nick's.
Sort of universal. It should be working, honestly. There's no reason why it shouldn't be working.
When that
Can they hear me?
Maine
Can you hear
occurred,
me?
at every press conference,
There was
there was a translator, and they
Hello?
were so expressive, I was watching.
is.
Sheldon?
Can Can you hear me
If you
now?
speak, I can hear you through this.
We have
Okay.
sign language.
My question is this: there is no king. The person who rules is the person God talks to. That person, let's say, does God communicate to him as an emotion or in Hebrew? But the person who interprets what God says is in fact the king.
So, let me, hang on. Okay, so Sheldon, what you're saying is that isn't the person who is functioning as the leader in the moment the king? And I'm going to say no, because the person who is functioning is either there's leadership from the king. Either you're the leader in the moment, or you're the king over the continuum of time. But the king's exercising leadership, and the prophet is exercising leadership. The difference is that the leader is given it for a specific task, and the communication is a one-time thing. You're appointed and go beat them. And with the king, again, there's no direct communication either. Does that answer your question?
Actually, what I'm saying is, before they had a king, the person who I'm assuming God didn't talk to everybody at the same time, but the person who God talked to has to go ahead and interpret what God said to the people, and they were supposed to follow that. So the person who God talks to, his interpretation is, in fact, he is the king. He is the person who God talks to, and the people follow what he says.
Okay, so what we're disagreeing about is the definition
Not
of,
all the people. Can you hear me?
right? I think you're
Can you hear
using
me?
the word king meaning
Only
leader.
Zoom.
And
Can you hear
I'm
me?
using leader as leader, and either the judge is the leader or the king is the leader. The difference is that the judge is not able to pass on his leadership to successive people, whereas a king does have a succession. That's the main difference between that. Also, the king has ownership of the property of everything,
Yeah.
whereas the judge doesn't have ownership of anything. And the
I
king has
couldn't hear you again.
administration, and the king has,
You want to
all sorts of things, represents the nation, whereas the judge doesn't. Okay?
It doesn't work. I can't hear you.
Okay.
Does that help find the clarification? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Just gonna turn that off. Okay, so that was the king. Now, as Phil said, it does set out, Deuteronomy does set out rules for kings, okay? And it's very basic, right? If after you enter the land, you decide I'm gonna have a king, I wanna do as all the nations do, you shall be free to set a king, right? It's permissive. Here's the rules. You can't set a foreigner over you. So you can't, become subservient to a different nation. One of your own must be your king. Moreover, he shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses. So the Lord has warned you, don't go back that way again. Don't have too many wives, lest his heart go astray. And he should not amass silver or gold to excess. And as Phil has rightly observed, Solomon does all three of those things. He sends people to Egypt to get more horses. He has more wives than he can count, and he's the richest man in the world. Okay? But those are the rules. But here's the limitation on the king. When he is seated on his royal throne, he shall have a copy of this Torah written for him on a scroll by the Levitical priests. Let it remain with him, and let him read it all his life, so he may learn to revere the Lord his God, to observe faithfully every word of the Torah, Thus he will not act haughtily towards his fellows or deviate from the commandment, to the left or to the right, the end that he and his descendants may reign long in the midst of Israel. And I think this haughtiness is an important thing, right? There was only one judge who thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Samson. Samson thought he was amazing, right? And he does a terrible job as a result, right? Every other judge, for the most part, is reluctant, right? Moses is reluctant to lead. Gideon's is reluctant to lead. All these guys are reluctant, right? And the problem with when you get a king is haughtiness. Because what happens when you get haughty?
You're above everybody else.
Right. That's the problem, right?
And he is.
When everyone's bowing down to you, how do you behave as someone who you begin to expect it? It's good as Simba says, it's good to be king. Okay, it's good to be king. It really is. It really is. Okay. So our succession of kings goes so-so. Okay, right? Who's the very first king of Israel? Saul. Okay. Not of the line of David. Well,
Wait a minute.
the Psalms hadn't been written yet. So Saul fails. Why is Saul is deposed or is cut off? Why is Saul cut off?
Because he didn't listen to God.
He doesn't follow instructions. He thinks for himself.
God gave him.
Samuel picked him out.
He picked him out.
Right. Samuel picked him out. He was head and shoulders above the rest.
He's tall.
He was tall. He also gave the name to a popular brand of dandruff shampoo. And
Head and shoulders.
okay. No, I mean, but he's literally tall. Okay, so David comes along. David's not as tall. David is king. David has a son Solomon. There's a lot of succession. There's a lot of intrigue over who's going to be king after David, and there's fighting over it, and it doesn't go well, right? You know, Adoniyahu wants to be king. That doesn't work out. He goes to open war with David. Absalom wants to be king. He goes to open war with David. Solomon becomes king. Solomon's a great king, okay? Solomon is so fantastic, right? Solomon loved many foreign women in addition to Pharaoh's daughter. Moabites and Ammonites and Edomites and Phoenicians and Hittite women from the nations of which the Lord had said to the Israelites, none of you shall join with them, and none of you shall join them, lest they turn your hearts away to follow their gods. Okay? Such Solomon clung to and loved. He had 700 royal wives and 300 concubines. It's a busy man. I don't know. And his wives turned his heart away. Okay? He bought temple. He built temples for all of his wives. Okay? So the Lord says to Solomon, because you're guilty of this, you've not kept my covenant, I'm going to tear the kingdom from you, right? I'm going to tear it in half. So Jeroboam is selected by the prophet, Jeroboam is selected to be by Ahijah of Shiloh to be the king of the northern kingdoms. Solomon dies. And Rehoboam is his son. And Rehoboam basically says, as tough as my father was on you, I shall be even worse. Right? You thought it was bad under him, it'll be worse under me. He's a terrible politician. Right? Does not do a good job. There's a rebellion. The country is split into two. Okay? So the rest of the line of the kings, I mean, the northern kingdom is always a constant cycle of different kings cycling in and out. And the southern kingdom, they're stuck with the line of David. And some of them are good kings and some of them are bad kings. Okay? But that's the basic pattern. Now, here are some thoughts of the Mishnah talking about the kings of Israel. Okay? And the Mishnah is writing after everything's fallen down, right? So they're looking back on history, and whether they're being accurate or not is, we don't know. So the high priest judges and is subject to judgment. He testifies and testimony is heard against him. So it's the high priest. The king neither judges, nor is he subject to judgment. He neither testifies, nor is testimony heard against him. So
He's above the law.
he's outside the law, right? He's not subject to the law, but he can't enforce the law either. In the Hasmonean system, in the Second Temple, once there's this high priest in there, the king's no longer responsible for the administration of justice. We just don't trust him for that. Okay? His job is to lead the nation in times of war. He leads the nation in optional war, as approved by the court of the Sanhedrin. Okay, already now the king is being limited by parliament. He breaks through to make his highway with no protest allowed. There's no fixed measure for the king's highway. After the battle, the people all loot and lay down their booty before him, and he takes first choice. He's the first among equals. He shall not have many wives, no more than 18. Rabbis have limits on it. Yeah. Rabbi Yehuda says he may have many as long as they do not lead his heart astray. You see by that one. Rabbi Shimon says even one wife is forbidden if she leads his heart astray. If so, what effect is it written, he shall not have many wives, to exclude even women like Abigail? Abigail led him away led David away to evil deeds. Shall not keep many horses, only those needed for his chariot. Or amass silver and gold, only as much for sustaining the army. He must write for himself a Torah scroll. When he goes forth to war, he must take it forth with him, and when returning, he brings it back. When he sits in judgment, it's with him. When reclining at meals, it's opposite him as written. Let it remain with him, and let him read it all his life. It's forbidden for him to ride on a horse, to sit on a throne, or to use the scepter. It's forbidden for him to it's forbidden for other people to ride on his horse, sit on his throne, use the scepter. You can't see him when he's having his hair cut or when he's naked or in the bathhouse. It says, set a king over yourself, let his fear be upon you. Okay? And the Jerusalem Talmud offers some critique on that Mishnah, because you heard the conflict there, right? What do you mean he doesn't judge, right? Jerusalem Talmud says, does the king not judge, as is not written, and David executed justice and tzedakah for all the people? Is this conceivable, that justice and tzedakah be executed simultaneously? Rather, he would render judgment, absolving the faultless, and fining against the liable. That if the liable party were poor, he would pay from his own assets. Thus he executed justice for one and tzedakah for another. Nor is he subject to judgment, as implied by the prayer of David, my judgment will come from you. In other words, God alone shall judge. The Bavli tells a story about that. So the king neither judges nor is he subject to judgment. Rav Yosef said this refers only to kings of Israel. Kings of the house of David, however, both judge and are subject to judgment. Right. For it's written, O house of David, thus said the Lord, render just verdicts morning and morning by morning. And if they are not subject to judgment, how can they judge other things? For as Rachel Kish expounded, examine yourself and only then examine others. Okay? So, northern kings, they're outside the system of justice already. But Davidic kings, they are subject to judgment. Why then are the kings of Israel not subject to judgment? Okay? Because of a certain event. So here's the story. Okay. So is the story. King Yanai's slave killed a person. Shimon ben Shetach said to his colleagues, the sages, "Set your eyes upon him and let us judge him." They sent him a message. "Your slave killed a person." Yanai dispatched the slave to appear before them. He sent them a further message. "Come here yourself as well," as it says, "and its owner shall be admonished." The Torah ordered that the owner should come and stand over his ox. Okay. So Yanai's slave kills a person, and they say, "Bring the slave here." He came and took a seat. Shammai ben Shadlach said to him, "King Yanai, stand on your feet and hear the testimony against you. It is not before us that you stand, but before him who spoke and brought into the world as being, as it's written, the two parties to the dispute shall stand before God." Yanai answered, "Not as you say, but as your colleagues say." He turned to his right, and they pressed their faces to the ground. He turned to his left, and they pressed their faces to the ground. They all bow down, right? Because he's the king, you have to bow down before the king. And Shimon ben Shetach said to them, "You possess thoughts, let the master of thoughts come and take revenge upon you." Immediately the angel Gabriel came and knocked them to the ground, and they died.
Sorry, I didn't follow the story.
So,
Who did they knock to the
Who
ground?
died?
so the king's being judged before these sages. He looks at the sages bow down because they want to respect the king. They're afraid to pronounce judgment on the king. And so Shimon ben Shetach says, "You guys, you fellow, judges, you possess your own thoughts. Like you're of independent thought. You should be able to stand up to the king." And so God kills them because they had no, backbone, right? At that point, it was established the king neither judges nor is he subject to judgment. He neither testifies nor is testimony heard against him, because how can you hold the king to account when he can kill you?
And then God killed him.
Right, because they were afraid that if they didn't agree, he would kill them.
How conflicted they must have
You're
been.
damned if you do and
Damned
you're
if
damned
you
if you
do,
don't.
damned if you don't.
But why was the king responsible for this?
Well,
But why?
if I'm responsible for what my cattle does, I'm responsible for what my slave does. It's a function of ownership.
Did anybody question why the slave killed this whatever person, friend? Well, I don't know.
Look, if I own a cow and the cow escapes and it goes into town and it wanders into a bar,
Cow walked into
This
the
sounds,
bar.
this sounds like a.
So that's the sad.
and it climbs the stairs and it's in the second floor and it falls through the floor, and on the way down its hoof breaks a spigot and the spigot pours water and it floods the basement.
There's no fire.
What? There's no fire, no. And all of the stuff is ruined. You would think that under the law of cattle,
The question is whether the cow had done this in the past and whether the owner had been.
in Torah law, yes. But no, that's just for goring. There's strict liability for cattle trespass. Now, that particular case I'm quoting actually happened, I think, in Scotland, and the judge said, no, this was not foreseeable. However, most other times, you are responsible for what your livestock does, okay? In American law, in Canadian law, in British
You're
law,
responsible to make restitution.
you're responsible to make restitution, right?
Have to repair the
Right,
bar.
the slave did the damage, you have to pay the restitution, okay? That's why he's responsible for the
So
slave.
he's responsible for the slave, so nobody cares what, why. They just,
No.
yeah, okay.
Why? Okay? So, kings have prerogatives, okay? So,
I can see the conflict,
okay?
Just,
Kings have prerogatives, they can have people serve them, and they build temples, and they build palaces, and all these other things. And Maimonides writes a whole code for kings about what they're supposed to do, right? He has to have his hair trimmed every day. Every day. Right? Has to wear beautiful clothes. All sorts of rules. Let's sort of skip forward a little bit here. The problem with kingship is that you shouldn't ask for a king because it's a rejection of God's kingship. It's showing a profound lack of faith. Okay. The Talmud says, Sephra. So, they shall say, I will set a king over me. Rabbi Nahari says, this is in disparagement of Israel. They have not rejected thee, but they have rejected me, but I should not be a king over them, says God. Rabbi Judah says, but is not a positive commandment of the Torah that they should demand for a king for themselves, as it said, thou shalt in any wise set over a king over you? Why then were they punished for doing so in the case of Samuel, right? As Phil said, if it says, when you want a king, this is the rules, why are they punished? Because they initiated it prematurely on their own. Yeah. Right? It's like trying to bring the Messiah early. You don't do that. Like all the nations around me, they demanded kings that they might lead them into idolatry, like all the other nations around them. Okay? So it's a bad idea that way. The Midrash Rabbah sees it as folly. The Holy One said to Israel, my children, I endeavor that you will be free of monarchy. Okay? You've done this for yourself. Why did you do this? Okay? So,
what does it get them? They don't.
So, a little bit from Abarbanel. Is a king necessary? Okay. The king's function for political society is similar to the relation of the heart to the body of an animal. Okay? Or first cause to the nature of the universe. So society requires three things: unified power, not shared, permanence and the absence of change, and absolute power. But that's got to be wrong, says Abarbanel, right? It's not impossible that a nation should have many leaders, right? And they could reach a consensus, right? And they could have terms of office, and they could hold individual magistrates to account. And certainly their powers don't have to be absolute. They could be limited by laws, right? So a king is not necessary for the people. That's a critique of kingship from, and Abarbanel is writing in a long time before democracies. He's thinking about democracies, right?
Especially Athens created.
Yeah, I know.
It's very efficient.
But he doesn't know about Athens.
Especially if you was from Spain. You were Aristotle, so I wouldn't be.
Yeah. So, in terms of kings as a sort of authority in the Jewish tradition, and I apologize for being kind of discombobulated today, but everything is happening all at the same time. The Bible provides for kingship. The Bible gives examples of kingship. But the Bible also provides examples of why kingship isn't necessarily the best sort of authority. And as we're going to see, the king is not the only source of authority in the Bible, even in the biblical stories, because the kings are still subject to the prophets and they're still subject to the priests. Right? And so they don't have absolute authority.
They also did God.
And they're all subject to it. Okay? So again, I'm a little bit off my game today, pardon me. But we'll come together again next week.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting. The name, whatever you said.